am here with Steve Lay, SVP of Product Management at Questionmark. And we're here to talk a little bit about workplace observational assessments. And could you start by defining a bit what observational assessments are?
So observational assessments, or as you described them, workplace observational assessments, the key thing about them is really that they're an opportunity for somebody to watch you perform a task. And perhaps one of the main advantages with this kind of assessment is that it's more authentic, it's more valid, because you're actually performing a task which is very closely aligned with what you're actually going to have to do in your work later on.
Yeah, I honestly found interesting the concept of evaluating how a professional is observing the phenomenon. I know this is something that's been a long time and there's a lot of standards, but I just find it very interesting. And these standards vary a little bit profession by profession. So the way you would evaluate observational skills.
Yeah, no, very much so. In fact, there's quite a wide range of different types of use case. Really, almost anything practical where you're using your hands to do your job could be observed this way. It could be everything from things like machine maintenance all the way through to things like medical diagnosis. So it's even got specialisms within the overarching area of observational assessment.
One of the reasons why we are talking here is the launch of a recent article in Nature, basically asking whether these skills can be successfully evaluated using online technology. This example was specifically in nursing, which I believe also has this. I'm not sure if OSCE applies, but do they have their own standard?
So when you go to the dentist, you have the dentist who's the clinical practitioner who's actually operating on your teeth. And then you have an assistant as a dental nurse. And so in that context, observing the dental nurses was used as an example as to whether, particularly during the pandemic, was it possible to reduce the exposure by not bringing the observer directly into the room to watch the dental nurse during a real procedure? And was that still as an effective mechanism of observing somebody in their actual practice? But now, after the practice is changing to be open more to observation face-to-face again, there's still now a question of, well, maybe there are other advantages if it's sufficient to do this procedure remotely and this observational procedure remotely. Maybe we can go forward and actually still use that and not have to travel to somebody's practice in order to observe them and get them qualified more quickly and so on.
As we have seen it in many instances, the pandemic made us in many ways be forced to implement online distant learning and assessment technologies. But let me just ask you maybe a little point blank, can observational assessments be transported fully to the online arena, or what are your thoughts on that?
So I think it does depend on the role of the observer. So in some observational assessments, the observer is an active participant in the process. So for example, they might be required to be present for safety reasons, and it might be that they are there to intervene if somebody does something wrong. So you get situations like that which can't easily be done remotely. And in fact, the study you referred to earlier was done using fairly standard software, fairly standard devices. So, definitely, I think those kinds of assessments could easily be done remotely, and the advantages are huge in terms of reducing travel to remote locations.
And I imagine that perhaps maybe not such a distant future, virtual reality could be also an element into this infrastructure.
Well, of course, beyond the sort of hardware changes that we've talked about. So I would say if you look in the augmented reality space, even more than the virtual reality space, that's where you'll begin to see perhaps some of the physical devices which will have an impact in this area. But actually, even the current technology that we have is often a little underused. So in the observational assessments, which we're seeing people doing, just actually using a phone or a tablet to go through and actually have that kind of observational checklist, replacing a clipboard and a piece of paper, This is still an important step for many people, and it involves instant capture of the information and, of course, very rapid feedback to the individual. And that can really make a big difference, especially if someone needs a just-in-time assessment, they're about to do a procedure.
I'm wondering how Questionmark fits into this landscape that you've mentioned here. What kind of value does the user get from using Questionmark in these circumstances? And if there's anything new or exciting that you're excited about Questionmark that's coming up.
So one of the big things that our customers are concerned with is being able to collect evidence in a defensible way, making sure everything is secure and that they know who is recording information about somebody.
And I'm a bit curious specifically about the medical school case. And well, I know Questionmark has offices in the UK and the US.
Mm-hmm.
Each country has their own specific regulations, both in terms
Mm-hmm.
of privacy, but also maybe healthcare privacy, which that it might apply. You may want to correct me on that. And also the standards for the practitioner. And I imagine like with Questionmark, it's fairly straightforward to make sure that you're complying to all of these regulations.
Correct. Yeah, that's really Questionmark has done a lot of the work. It's not just technology development, it's legal and organizational and process work that enables us to be a good partner and help you be compliant with all of those kinds of standards.
So if people want to know more about Questionmark, where should they go?
Well, a great place to start will be our website, which is questionmark.com, where you'll be able to read all about our product and our platform.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.